Disoriented and terrified, Ellie escapes the golden cage, only to be drawn into Marcus's dark trap. She flees from a monster, but the Dark King explodes in a primal rage, tearing the city apart to reclaim what is his. He will burn everything to get her back. Now bound by a love as terrifying as it is powerful, she is his. But can her heart survive this dangerous king? The scent of aged paper and brewing coffee was a fragile shield against the encroaching city. Ellie Vance, 28, breathed it in, a ritualistic act each morning as she unlocked the heavy oak door of the dusty page. The bell above chimed a mournful, solitary note, echoing in the cavernous silence of the empty bookstore. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of early light, illuminating the worn paths on the floorboards, the faded floral wallpaper, and the countless spines of forgotten narratives. Each book was a memory, a whisper from a past rapidly being devoured by the present. Her fingers, calloused from stacking crates and scrubbing counters, trembled slightly as she reached for the familiar white envelope taped precariously to the glass. Another eviction notice. The stark, formal script, colder than the morning air, threatened to snuff out the last flicker of her grandmother's dream. Final notice. The words were a hammer blow to her chest, stealing the fragile air from her lungs. This one felt different, heavier, laden with an irreversible finality that gnawed at her hope. Ellie's gaze drifted from the paper to the world outside the rain-streaked window. Gleaming behemoths of glass and steel pierced the gray sky, monuments to a relentless modernity that had no place for quiet havens like hers. Her beloved bookstore, a defiant little island of warmth and history, was being suffocated, surrounded by the sterile, soulless architecture of Marcus Thorne's burgeoning empire. She could almost feel the concrete growing, pressing in, its cold ambition threatening to crack the very foundations of the dusty page. She moved through the aisles, her steps a soft rhythm against the creaking wood, polishing surfaces that would soon gather dust again. Each action was a silent protest, a desperate cling to normalcy amidst the rising tide of despair. She ran her hand over the cracked leather spine of a first edition, a Dickens that had belonged to her grandmother. "Never let them dim your light, my Ellie," her grandmother used to say, her eyes twinkling over her spectacles. Now Ellie felt that light fading, becoming a ghostly flicker in the face of insurmountable odds. The bookstore was more than just a business. It was her inheritance, her sanctuary, the last tangible link to a love she had lost too soon. Her grandmother had poured her heart into the dusty page, cultivating it into a vibrant community hub, a place where stories lived and breathed. Ellie remembered the laughter, the animated discussions in the reading nook, the scent of fresh-baked bread from the old oven her grandmother insisted on keeping. Now the oven was cold, and the laughter was a phantom echo in the hollow expanse of the shelves. Mounting debts were a suffocating shroud, wrapping around her every waking moment. The utilities were overdue, the supplier bills piled high, and the bank, once sympathetic, had turned cold. She'd sold off most of her personal possessions, her modest savings drained by legal battles that felt less like justice and more like a cruel, drawn-out execution. She was alone, utterly and terribly alone, navigating this financial abyss with nothing but her fierce, unyielding spirit and a dwindling reserve of strength. The threat of Marcus Thorne wasn't just a faceless corporation. Ellie had seen him. A man with eyes like polished obsidian, devoid of warmth, whose perfectly tailored suits seemed to mock her threadbare existence. He embodied the relentless, predatory nature of the city, a man who saw history as rubble and dreams as inconveniences. His construction crews, a constant rumbling presence across the street, were a daily reminder of her impending doom. The sound of their machinery, a low guttural growl, was the soundtrack to her despair. Her attempts at defiance were small, almost pathetic. She meticulously documented every shady dealing, every bypassed permit, every hushed conversation she overheard, scribbling notes in a worn leather journal she kept hidden beneath the counter. A quixotic fight, perhaps, against a behemoth that could crush her without a second thought. But it was her fight, her last stand. It was a testament to the resilience her grandmother had instilled in her, a stubborn refusal to simply lie down and let the wolves feast. A few regular customers trickled in throughout the morning. Mrs. Henderson, a retired English teacher who always bought a mystery novel, and Mr. Kim, who sought out obscure philosophy texts. Ellie forced a smile, her voice bright, masking the frantic drumbeat of anxiety in her chest. She poured her coffees, chatted briefly about new arrivals, all while her mind raced, calculating, planning, desperately seeking an escape route that didn't exist. Each transaction, no matter how small, was a tiny victory against the overwhelming current pulling her under. By late afternoon, the bookstore felt heavier, the light dimmer, as if the walls themselves were absorbing her sorrow. The rain outside intensified, blurring the city lights into abstract smears of color. She sat in her grandmother's old armchair, the velvet worn smooth from countless hours of reading, a half-read novel forgotten in her lap. The words swam before her eyes, unable to penetrate the thick fog of her worries. She closed her eyes, picturing her grandmother, her warm embrace, the comforting scent of lavender and old books. Be brave, Ellie Bell. Be brave even when your knees are knocking. But her knees weren't just knocking. They felt like jelly ready to give way. The silence of the empty store, usually a balm, now felt oppressive, amplifying her loneliness until it was a physical ache. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the large display window, a sharp, insistent tremor that made her jump. It wasn't just the wind. A new Mercedes sedan, impossibly sleek and black, had just pulled up to the curb directly in front of her store. It was a vehicle that screamed power, wealth, and a certain kind of dangerous ambition that made her skin prickle. She watched, her breath catching in her throat, as the rear door opened. A man stepped out, tall and impeccably dressed, a dark suit clinging to broad shoulders that seemed to defy the rain. Even from a distance, his presence was palpable, a magnetic force that demanded attention. He looked up, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, his gaze, sharp as obsidian, seemed to cut through the rain and the glass directly into her soul. Her fragile shield of resilience crumbled, replaced by a sudden, inexplicable dread. The bell above the door chimed, not mournful this time, but sharp and intrusive, signaling an entrance that felt less like a customer and more like a verdict. Ellie's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't know who he was, but cold certainty settled in her gut. Her quiet, fading dream of the dusty page was about to collide with a storm far more dangerous than the one brewing outside. The chime of the bell, usually a gentle invitation, now struck Ellie's ears like a discordant gong. It was too sharp, too loud for the quiet melancholy of her afternoon. She flinched, her gaze tearing from the unsettling silhouette outside to the man now filling her doorway. He was impossibly tall, a dark, imposing figure against the gray, rain-swept street. Water slicked the shoulders of his charcoal suit, a fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of expensive leather and something woodsy masculine clung to him, cutting through the familiar aroma of old paper and brewing coffee. His eyes. That was the first thing that truly registered. Not the meticulously styled dark hair, slightly damp, or the sharp, chiseled lines of his jaw, but his eyes. They were the color of steel, storm gray, deep-set, and utterly devoid of warmth. They swept across the cozy disarray of the dusty page, the overflowing shelves, the mismatched armchairs, the worn counter, before locking onto her with a terrifying, almost surgical precision. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, snaked down Ellie's spine, making the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. He wasn't just looking, he was assessing. Ellie swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if those obsidian eyes could strip away her layers of fatigue and fear, revealing every raw nerve beneath. Her usual practiced smile, a brittle facade she'd perfected for patrons, felt impossible. She gripped the worn edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "Can I help you?" she managed, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the drumming rain against the windows. He didn't speak immediately. His gaze lingered on her face, then dipped to the crumpled eviction notice still clutched in her hand. A faint, almost imperceptible curl touched the corner of his lips, a movement that wasn't quite a smile, but something far more chilling. He took a single deliberate step inside, and the small bookstore, which had always felt vast to Ellie, suddenly seemed to shrink, suffocating under his immense presence. Two hulking figures, indistinguishable from the shadows they cast, materialized behind him at the doorway, their silent watch an unsettling promise of unseen power. Ellie's heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. Mafia. The whispered word, a fleeting rumor in her mind, solidified into a cold, hard truth. The air around him crackled with an unspoken authority, a quiet danger that felt far more potent than any shouted threat. She had dealt with demanding customers, with aggressive debt collectors, even with Marcus Thorne's oily charm, but this man, he was something else entirely. A force of nature, contained and precise, yet undeniably dangerous. Just then, the bell above the door chimed again, and Mrs. Gable, a notoriously impatient regular, bustled in, shaking droplets from her bright purple umbrella. Ellie, dear, my usual, quickly. I'm absolutely drenched. Ellie jumped, her focus momentarily fractured. She had been so consumed by the man in the doorway, she'd forgotten her immediate duties. Of course, Mrs. Gable. Coming right up. She turned, her movements rushed and clumsy, reaching for the steaming kettle on the small hot plate behind the counter. The eviction notice, still in her hand, suddenly felt like a branding iron. Her mind was a whirlwind. Mrs. Gable's impatience, the silent, menacing man, the final notice that mocked her every effort. Her hand, trembling with a combination of nerves and exhaustion, fumbled with the ceramic mug. The hot liquid sloshed, a dark, viscous wave. Time seemed to slow. She saw it happen, a horrifying slow-motion disaster. The mug tilted, the rich, dark coffee arcing through the air, directly towards the immaculate charcoal suit of the man who stood too close, too still. A gasp escaped her lips, thin and sharp. Oh no. I am so incredibly sorry. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, laced with genuine horror. She watched, paralyzed, as the hot liquid blossomed on his expensive fabric, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The bitter aroma of burnt coffee filled the air, mingling with the woodsy scent of his cologne. For a heartbeat, he remained utterly motionless, his expression unreadable. Not a muscle twitched in his face. Not a single sound escaped his lips. The sheer, unnerving calm of him was more terrifying than any outburst. Then, very slowly, his eyes, those piercing, obsidian depths, lowered from her face to the spreading stain on his suit. Ellie felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her, hot and stinging. Her cheeks burned. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole, to vanish into the dusty corners of her beloved bookstore. She was a clumsy, pathetic mess, and she had just irrevocably offended a man who radiated more danger than anyone she had ever encountered. I can try to clean it, she stammered, frantically reaching for a damp cloth she kept under the counter. Or I'll pay for it. Whatever it costs, I'll pay. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She knew she couldn't afford a new suit for him. The thought alone was ludicrous. She could barely afford rent. He finally moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the same one the coffee had soiled, and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, folded with surgical precision. He dabbed at the dark stain, his movements precise, almost detached, as if he were cleaning something insignificant. Then his voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet space, shattered the suffocating silence. It was deep, resonant, and held an undercurrent of something undeniably powerful. A simple accident, miss. Ellie Vance, she supplied, her voice still trembling. He gave a curt nod, his gaze returning to her face, scrutinizing, intense. Gabriel Thorne. The name, when he spoke it, felt weighty, a declaration of ownership over the very air around them. And you seem distracted. His eyes flickered once more to the crumpled eviction notice, a silent accusation. Ellie flushed, exposed. It's nothing. Just a bad day. She tried to sound nonchalant, but her voice cracked on the last word. She was a terrible liar. Gabriel Thorne, Gabriel Thorne. The name whispered through the city's undercurrents, associated with ruthless takeovers and shadowy deals. She had dismissed them as exaggerated gossip, but now, standing before him, feeling the sheer force of his presence, she knew the whispers were likely just the tip of a very dangerous iceberg. He folded the now-stained handkerchief with an almost fastidious care, slipping it back into his pocket. "I like my coffee." It wasn't a question or a demand, but a simple statement of fact. Then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he sent his 2 bodyguards, who had remained sentinel at the door, away. They melted back into the rain, as silently as they had appeared, leaving Ellie alone with him. "Another one," he said, his eyes still fixed on her, "and perhaps a quiet corner. I find myself in need of distraction." He wasn't asking. It was an order, subtly disguised as a request. His tone hadn't changed, still that low, dangerous purr, but there was a new nuance to it, an almost predatory interest. Ellie stared at him, bewildered. No anger, no demands for compensation, just a quiet command for more coffee and a corner of her struggling bookstore. It was unsettling. It was confusing. It was undeniably intriguing. The fear still coiled in her stomach, a cold knot, a tiny spark, a dangerous flicker of curiosity ignited within her. Who was this man, this obsidian king, who chose to spend his time in her dusty, fading dream of a bookstore? And why did his unblinking gaze make her feel both terrified and impossibly seen? Of course, she managed, her voice steadier this time, the tremor almost gone. She turned to brew his coffee, her mind racing, 1,000 questions swirling in her head. She could feel his eyes on her back, a tangible weight, as she moved with uncharacteristic clumsiness. Her hands, still slightly shaky, carefully measured out the beans. This wasn't just another customer. This was a turning point. A predator had entered her sanctuary, and she had a chilling premonition that nothing in the dusty page, or her life, would ever be the same again. The lingering scent of Gabriel Thorne's expensive cologne, a blend of cedar and something impossibly sharp, seemed to cling to the air in the dusty page long after he'd gone. Ellie had tried to dismiss the encounter, to tell herself he was just another eccentric billionaire, but the memory of his obsidian eyes, the quiet power in his voice, had burrowed deep, nesting in the fragile corners of her mind. That night, she hadn't slept, haunted by a mixture of lingering fear and a strange, dangerous curiosity. Her brief, unsettling reprieve was shattered with the brutal dawn. She arrived at the bookstore to find not just another eviction notice, but utter desecration. The large display window, painstakingly cleaned just yesterday, was now a spiderweb of shattered glass, a gaping wound in the face of her beloved store. Splintered wood littered the pavement, and across the once pristine facade crude, red spray paint screamed, "Get out," and "Dindy." The acrid, chemical smell of the paint burned her nostrils, mixing with a metallic tang of fear. Ellie's breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, choked sob. Her hands flew to her mouth, trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't just a threat anymore. It was an act of violence, a direct assault on the last piece of her soul. She felt a cold, crushing despair settle over her, heavier than any debt. Marcus Thorne. It had to be him, a clear escalation, a message designed to break her spirit. The sheer audacity, the blatant disregard for law and order, made her knees weak. She spent the morning boarding up the window, her body aching, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Every slam of the hammer against would echo the relentless pounding of her own fear. Customers, usually a comforting presence, peered cautiously at the damage, their pitying glances making her feel even more exposed, more vulnerable. "Oh, Ellie, dear, are you all right?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her voice hushed, her eyes wide with sympathy. Ellie forced a brittle smile, a mask over the raw pain. "Just a bit of an accident," she lied, the words tasting like ash. Her last hope, a desperate legal maneuver her overworked, underpaid lawyer had promised, evaporated that afternoon in a sterile, windowless office. Mr. Davies, a kindly man whose shoulders seemed perpetually slumped under the weight of lost causes, shook his head, his face a roadmap of regret. Ellie, I'm so sorry. The injunction, it was denied. The judge cited procedural irregularities, a fancy way of saying Marcus Thorne's pockets are deeper than ours. Far deeper. He pushed a stack of official-looking documents across the polished table, their corners sharp, merciless. They even managed to get an expedited demolition order. You have 72 hours, Ellie. 72 hours. 3 days. The words echoed in her mind, the death knell. Not for the bookstore, but for her. For her grandmother's legacy. For every memory woven into those dusty shelves. Ellie stared at the papers, blurring through a sudden film of tears she refused to shed. Despair, cold and absolute, wrapped around her, squeezing the last vestiges of hope from her. She had truly fought, but against a force like Marcus Thorne, a man clearly backed by something darker, deeper, she was just a small, insignificant ripple. She was adrift, sinking fast, with no lifeboat in sight. As she stumbled out of the lawyer's office, the city noise, usually a dull roar, now sounded like a chaotic cacophony, mocking her defeat. The rain had picked up again, mirroring the storm inside her. She didn't know where to go, what to do. Her apartment above the store suddenly felt like another trap, a place where Marcus could find her, continue his intimidation. Just as she reached the curb, a sleek black car, impossibly familiar, pulled silently alongside her. The window, tinted dark, slid down with a nearly inaudible hum. And there he was, Gabriel Thorne. His presence, even in the confines of the vehicle, was overwhelming, almost suffocating. His steel-gray eyes, impassive and unreadable, met hers. Get in, Miss Vance. It wasn't a question. It was a command, softly spoken, yet carrying the weight of absolute authority. Ellie hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold metal of the car door. Every instinct screamed danger, run, don't trust. But the alternative, the image of her bookstore reduced to rubble, of her standing alone amidst the ruins, was far more terrifying. She saw the implicit threat in his gaze, a quiet promise that refusing him might be more perilous than accepting. She slid into the plush leather seat, the scent of luxury and power enveloping her. The door clicked shut with a solid, final thud, severing her from the chaotic street, from a collapsing world. It felt less like getting into a car and more like stepping into a cage. A very, very expensive cage. Gabe didn't immediately drive. He simply watched her, his profile sharp against the passing city lights. Marcus Thorne is a foolish man, he finally said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the car's silent interior. He touched what he should not have. Ellie bristled, despite her fear. He's destroying my life, my grandmother's legacy, and I will ensure he pays for that. His tone was flat, devoid of emotion, yet the underlying current of cold, brutal certainty sent another shiver down her spine. This wasn't just a man. This was a force. I have a proposition, Miss Vance. A business arrangement. Ellie stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate, frantic hope. What kind of proposition? He turned to face her fully, his gaze intense, piercing. I will buy the dusty page from you. Not to demolish it, but to restore it, to protect it. I will settle your debts, cover all damages, and ensure Marcus Thorne never troubles you again. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In return, you will move into my estate. Under my supervision. Ellie gasped, the air suddenly thin in the luxurious car. Your supervision? What does that even mean? I can't just move in with you. I don't even know you. Her voice was shrill, laced with a fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The idea was absurd, terrifying. Living under the roof of a man she knew to be a Mafia boss, a man whose power radiated menace, was unthinkable. It means, he said, his voice hardening, that you will be safe. You will be protected. From Marcus, from anyone else who seeks to harm you, or what is mine? He paused, his eyes narrowing, and, yes, Miss Vance, you will move in with me. You have exhausted all other options. You have 72 hours before your dream becomes rubble. This is your only path. Ellie's mind reeled, a desperate, frantic scramble for any other alternative. There was none. She was at the bottom of the abyss. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact, an unyielding truth. She hated the feeling of being cornered, hated the idea of surrendering her independence, but the image of the dusty page intact, thriving, was a siren song too sweet to resist. And the thought of being truly safe, even for a moment, was a fragile, intoxicating promise. She closed her eyes, a silent battle raging within her. Pride screamed against it. Survival whispered acceptance. The fate of her grandmother's legacy hung in the balance. When she opened her eyes, Gabriel Thorne was still watching her, his face a mask of calm, predatory patience. Fine, she breathed, the word a reluctant surrender, tearing from her throat. It felt like signing a Faustian bargain, selling her freedom for a dream. I accept. But I want to be clear, Mr. Thorne. I am doing this for the dusty page. Nothing else. A flicker, a ghost of something unreadable, crossed his obsidian eyes. Understood, Miss Vance, he rumbled, and a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of his head could have been mistaken for a smile. Welcome to your new life. He then barked a single curt command into a concealed microphone near his mouth, his voice sharp and decisive. The car, which had been idling, surged forward, swallowing them deeper into the rain-swept labyrinth of the city, carrying Ellie away from everything she knew, towards an unknown future under the watchful, possessive gaze of the Obsidian King. She was terrified, but a strange, unsettling tremor, a spark of the truly unknown, had also begun to ignite within her. The drive to Gabriel Thorne's estate had been a blur of dark, rain-streaked windows and suffocating silence. Ellie sat stiffly, her worn canvas bag clutched in her lap, the weight of her entire salvaged life contained within its modest confines. The car moved with an almost arrogant speed, slicing through the city streets as if the world parted for it. When they finally turned off the main road, the roar of the city faded into a hushed murmur, replaced by the whispering sigh of the wind through ancient trees. The estate, when it finally revealed itself through the gloom, was not merely large. It was vast. A sprawling edifice of dark stone and intricate ironwork. It rose from the manicured grounds like something plucked from a Gothic novel. Security cameras, subtle but pervasive, glinted from strategic points, watching, always watching. The air, even before they reached the grand entrance, felt different here, cleaner, colder, undeniably controlled. It was a fortress, not a home. A tall, impeccably dressed woman with a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing greeted them. Her name, Ellie would later learn, was Mrs. Albright, the head housekeeper, a woman who moved with the silent efficiency of a predator. Her polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which appraised Ellie with an unnerving scrutiny. "Welcome, Miss Vance," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble, devoid of any genuine warmth. Ellie was led through cavernous hallways, past gleaming marble floors that reflected her weary face like a distorted ghost. Gilded frames held paintings she instinctively knew were priceless. Sculptures of cold, classical beauty stood sentinel in alcoves. Every surface gleamed, every fixture radiated an almost oppressive opulence. This was a world of silk and steel, a universe away from the dusty, lived-in warmth of her bookstore. It was breathtaking, yes, but also utterly alien, a gilded cage designed for someone else entirely. Her breath hitched. She was trapped. Her assigned room was not a room. It was a suite. A vast space dominated by a four-poster bed draped in rich, dark velvet, the kind that cost more than her entire life's earnings. A sprawling antique desk sat beneath a tall window overlooking grounds that stretched into the misty distance. The bathroom, gleaming with chrome and white tile, was larger than her entire apartment above the dusty page. She ran a hand over the impossibly soft duvet, then pressed her fingers against the cool, smooth silk of the curtains. It was magnificent, and it filled her with a profound, unsettling dread. This wasn't freedom. It was a more comfortable form of imprisonment. The first few days were a blur of enforced routine. Meals, served with silent efficiency by discreet staff, appeared at precise times. She was given a schedule for her studies, which involved digitizing the inventory of the dusty page from a new high-tech laptop provided by Gabe. Every time she tried to venture beyond her designated wing, Mrs. Albright would materialize, a polite but firm barrier. "Mr. Thorne prefers guests to remain in their allotted areas, Miss Vance. For your own safety, of course." The implication was clear. You are not a guest. You are a ward. And you are being watched. Gabe was a phantom for the most part. She saw him rarely, usually at dinner in the cavernous dining room. He sat at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, a solitary king in his obsidian kingdom. His meals were simple, consumed with a focused intensity that bordered on predatory. He rarely spoke, offering curt acknowledgments to Mrs. Albright or terse commands to his staff. When his gaze did fall on Ellie, it was fleeting but potent, a silent acknowledgment of her presence, a reminder of the unspoken agreement that bound her to this strange, dangerous world. Yet, despite the confinement, despite the gnawing fear, she began to notice things. Subtle shifts. After her initial complaints about not having her own books, a small, elegant bookshelf appeared in her suite, not just filled with generic titles, but a carefully curated selection of classic literature and even some obscure historical texts she'd only ever glimpsed in university libraries. They were exactly the kind of books she would have chosen. A tiny, unsettling spark of curiosity ignited within her. Had he noticed her preferences? Had he remembered their brief, coffee-stained encounter? One morning, she woke to the sound of distant hammering. Later, she saw new, reinforced windows being installed throughout her wing. The security system, already formidable, seemed to be constantly upgraded, silent guards patrolling the perimeter with an almost unnerving diligence. She was a prisoner, yes, but a prisoner under an extraordinarily thorough, almost obsessive form of protection. The feeling was a perplexing cocktail of resentment and a strange, unfamiliar sense of safety. She hated the loss of freedom, but the primal part of her, the one that had been hounded and threatened, found a cautious solace in the unyielding strength surrounding her. She observed Gabe's routines from a distance. Early mornings, he would be in his expansive home office, the low hum of his voice sometimes carrying faintly through the thick walls as he conducted business calls. He was a whirlwind of controlled energy, his days packed with meetings she knew were far removed from legitimate real estate deals. He moved through his estate like its very architecture, precise, powerful, and utterly solitary. He was often surrounded by men in dark suits, their faces grim, their movements economical, but there was an undeniable loneliness in his posture when he sat alone, gazing out at the rain-swept gardens, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. A crack in the obsidian, a glimpse of the man beneath the legend. One evening, unable to sleep, Ellie wandered to the vast library, a room she'd only seen from a distance. The scent of old leather and rich mahogany was a comforting balm. She found Gabe there, silhouetted against the tall, arched windows, reading by the faint glow of a single lamp. He wore a silk robe, dark as midnight, over a simple white t-shirt, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked less like the intimidating Mafia boss and more like a man burdened by the weight of a silent world. He didn't look up immediately, but she felt his awareness, a magnetic pull across the vast room. The air shimmered with an unspoken tension, thick and palpable. Her heart, usually so guarded, began a hesitant drumbeat against her ribs. She was acutely aware of the warmth of the room, the scent of him, the way the soft lamplight accentuated the hard planes of his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to caress the silence. He still didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the page. "No," she whispered, her voice barely there. "Too quiet." He finally lifted his head, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers across the expanse of the library. There was no anger, no accusation, only that unsettling, potent intensity. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke, the silence stretching, heavy with unspoken questions and burgeoning, dangerous curiosity. The air thickened with it, a fragile, unspoken chemistry that sparked in the quiet of the night, pulling them into a vortex of the unknown. Her confinement was absolute, but the boundaries of her heart felt terrifyingly porous. And for the first time, she wondered if this cage of silk and steel was truly just for her, or if he, too, was a prisoner within its opulent walls. The opulence of Gabriel Thorne's estate, once suffocating, had begun to feel like a strange, unsettling cocoon. Ellie had settled into a wary rhythm, her days filled with the meticulous task of cataloging the dusty pages inventory, a bittersweet endeavor that brought both comfort and a poignant ache for her lost sanctuary. Yet the longing for her old life, for the familiar smells and sounds of her neighborhood, gnawed at her. She needed to retrieve a specific box of her grandmother's letters, hidden in the back storage room of the bookstore, a collection of memories she couldn't bear to leave to fate or Marcus Thorne's wrecking ball. After days of polite but firm resistance from Mrs. Albright, Ellie finally confronted Gabe in his study, the rich scent of old leather and something vaguely smoky clinging to the air. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing documents with an intense focus that made her feel like an unwelcome intrusion. "I need to go back," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Just for a few hours. To retrieve something important." He looked up, his steel gray eyes unblinking, assessing her with that unnerving intensity. "Unwise," he rumbled, his voice low. "Marcus Thorne is not a man to be underestimated." "I understand the risks," she countered, pushing down the rising tide of fear. "But these are my grandmother's letters. They mean everything to me. I can't leave them." His gaze lingered on her, then shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible softening around the edges of his formidable composure. "Very well," he conceded, the word a reluctant sigh. "But you will not go alone. 2 of my men will accompany you. They will be discreet, but they will be there. And you will not deviate from the agreed-upon route or timeline." His tone left no room for argument. "Is that understood, Miss Vance?" Ellie nodded, a wave of relief washing over her, quickly followed by a fresh surge of apprehension. She was being allowed a glimpse of her past, but under the omnipresent shadow of her new keeper. The ride to her old neighborhood was jarring. The sleek black SUV, a stark contrast to the familiar buses she once took, glided through the bustling streets. Her 2 silent escorts, large men with watchful eyes, sat in the front, their presence a constant reminder of Gabe's pervasive control. As they neared the dusty page, Ellie's heart ached with a profound sense of loss. The boarded-up window was a raw scar, a testament to Marcus's cruelty. The vibrant murals that once adorned the adjacent buildings had been defaced, replaced by crude graffiti, another sign of Marcus's encroaching influence. She stepped out of the car, breathing in the familiar, grittier air of her old street. It smelled of exhaust fumes, stale pastries, and a faint, sweet hint of decaying leaves. A sharp, nostalgic pang twisted in her gut. This was her home, her world, crumbling under the weight of greed. "Stay close, Miss Vance." One of the men, a gruff giant named Boris, murmured. Ellie ignored him, her eyes fixed on the bookstore's battered door. The bell mercifully was silent. The air inside was cool, stagnant, smelling of damp plaster and lingering despair. As she moved towards the back storage room, her hand brushing against the empty shelves where her favorite novels once stood, a chilling certainty settled over her. This wasn't just a place of memories. It was a ghost. She found the box of letters exactly where she'd left it, tucked beneath a stack of old accounting ledgers. As she lifted the worn cardboard, a faint rustling from the main entrance made her freeze. Boris and his partner, Sergei, tensed instantly, their hands subtly moving towards their jackets. The main door creaked open, admitting a sliver of gray light and 2 figures. They weren't Gabe's men. These were Marcus Thorne's enforcers, unmistakable with their slicked-back hair, cheap suits, and eyes that held no warmth, only a cold, calculating menace. Ellie recognized them from the periphery of Marcus's earlier visits. Well, look what we have here." One of them sneered, a man with a scarred eyebrow. His voice was rough, laced with a sneering contempt that made Ellie's skin crawl. Little Miss Bookseller, playing hooky from her new sugar daddy. Boris and Sergei stepped forward, blocking Ellie from view. This area is off limits, Boris rumbled, his voice a low growl of warning. Scarred-brow chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, is it? We got different orders. Mr. Thorne wants a message delivered. Special delivery, just for the lady. His eyes, cold as chipped ice, flickered past Gabe's men, fixing on Ellie with a chilling intensity. Tell your rich boyfriend to back off, little girl. Or next time, it won't just be a window that gets broken. He thinks he's tough. He doesn't know what real pressure is. The second man, taller and gaunt, pulled out a small, gleaming switchblade, idly flicking the blade open and shut. The metallic click echoed ominously in the silent bookstore. Maybe we just remind her what happens when she forgets her place. Ellie felt a jolt of raw terror, cold and sharp, sliced through her. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a direct threat, a violation of the fragile safety Gabe had promised. Her mind screamed run, but her feet were rooted to the spot, trembling uncontrollably. She watched, paralyzed by fear, as the two men began to advance. Suddenly, Boris spoke, not to Marcus's men, but into a discreet earpiece Ellie hadn't noticed. His words were sharp, concise, spoken in a language she didn't understand, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. 2 targets. Aggressive. Location confirmed. Before Marcus's men could take another step, a sharp, almost musical ping echoed from the street outside. Then another and another. A rapid succession of digital tones. Scarbrow's phone vibrated wildly. He pulled it out, his sneer faltering, replaced by a look of bewildered frustration. What the hell? His phone screen, visible even from Ellie's vantage point, flashed with dozens of incoming messages, notifications, and alerts. His face drained of color. No way. The East Side warehouse, the permits, they're being revoked. All of them. How? The gaunt man's phone began to ring incessantly. He answered, his voice a panicked stammer. Boss, the bank just froze our accounts. All of them. And the city inspector just shut down the demolition site for safety violations. What's going on? Scarbrow's eyes, which moments ago held such menace, now darted around frantically, wide with a dawning horror. He looked at Boris and Sergei, then at Ellie, a terrifying comprehension dawning in his eyes. This wasn't a coincidence. This was retribution. Get out, Boris growled, stepping forward, his voice a low, lethal warning. Now, Marcus's men, their bravado utterly shattered, didn't hesitate. They stumbled backward, their faces pale with a sudden, bone-deep fear that had nothing to do with physical threats and everything to do with unseen, unimaginable power. The switchblade clattered to the floor, forgotten. They scrambled out of the bookstore, their hasty retreat a stark contrast to their earlier arrogance, leaving behind only the acrid scent of cheap cologne and palpable terror. Ellie watched them go, her breath catching in her throat. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren, heading in the direction of Marcus's now shut-down demolition site. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto a dusty crate, the box of letters held tight against her chest. Boris and Sergei stood over her, their faces impassive. Are you all right, Miss Vance? Sergei asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Ellie could only nod, her mind reeling. She hadn't seen Gabe. He hadn't lifted a finger. Yet, in mere seconds, he had dismantled a significant portion of Marcus Thorne's operation, not with brute force, but with an invisible, devastating efficiency that bespoke an intricate, far-reaching web of influence. He hadn't just warned Marcus, he had shown him a glimpse of true power, a power that could crush his empire without a single visible blow. The fear in her was still potent, but was now laced with something new, something unsettling and profoundly awe-inspiring. Gabe hadn't just protected her, he had avenged her in a way she couldn't have even conceived. She felt a sickening lurch of internal conflict. This man, this terrifying mafia boss, represented everything she despised: corruption, control, ruthless power. Yet, he was the one who had saved her, the one who had made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. The thought was both repulsive and undeniably comforting. When the SUV pulled back into the sprawling driveway of Gabe's estate, the gates closing behind them with an authoritative clang, Ellie still felt the ghost of Scarred Brow's icy gaze. Gabe was waiting for them in the grand foyer, standing by a table adorned with a vase of dark blood-red roses. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. His steel-gray eyes, calm and knowing, swept over Ellie's pale, shaken face, then flickered to Boris, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Gabe simply walked over to her, his movements fluid and purposeful. He reached out, his large hand gently closing around her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His thumb brushed lightly over her trembling lower lip. "A simple warning, Miss Vance," he rumbled, his voice a low, dangerous purr that sent shivers down her spine. "For those who fail to heed my wishes." His eyes, dark as obsidian, held hers captive, an unspoken promise of absolute protection and even more absolute possession. Ellie stared back, her heart pounding. She was still afraid, but that fear was now inextricably tangled with a burgeoning, unsettling trust. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster, and she was beginning to understand that in his dangerous world, his ruthlessness was the most potent form of protection she could ever hope to have. Her cage might be made of silk and steel, but it was also a fortress against everything that sought to harm her. And for the first time, the thought of being trapped within it didn't feel entirely unwelcome. The aftermath of Gabe's silent retribution had left Ellie in a strange, unsettling limbo. The immediate, gnawing fear of Marcus Thorne had receded, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying awe for the man who now held her fate in his formidable hands. The image of those two thugs, their faces contorted by a terror far deeper than any physical threat, was seared into her memory. She had seen firsthand the intricate, devastating web of Gabriel Thorne's power, a force that could dismantle empires with a whisper. Yet, this all was tangled with a persistent internal conflict. He was dangerous. He was ruthless. He was everything her moral compass instinctively recoiled from. But he had also protected her, saved her cherished bookstore, and, in a twisted, possessive way, made her feel safer than she had in years. The dichotomy was exhausting, stirring a tempest of confusion within her. One evening, unable to find solace in the velvet confines of her suite, Ellie found herself drawn, once again, to the estate's sprawling library. The scent of aged paper, leather, and wood was the only familiar comfort in this gilded cage. Rain, a soft, melancholic drumming, traced patterns on the tall, arched windows, mirroring the quiet storm in her soul. She pushed open one of the massive double doors, the hinges moving with a barely audible sigh. The library, bathed in the soft, incandescent glow of a single fireplace, was a sanctuary of shadows and flickering light. And there he was, Gabriel Thorne. He sat not at the imposing central desk, but in a worn, leather armchair tucked away in a dimly lit corner, a testament to its frequent use. He wore a dark, unbuttoned shirt, the sleeves rolled haphazardly to his elbows, revealing strong forearms veined with faint scars. A tumbler of amber liquid rested on a small side table, untouched. He wasn't reading. His gaze was fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth, his expression desolate, almost haunting. The formidable armor he usually wore, the impenetrable mask of the Obsidian King, seemed to have been shed, leaving behind a raw, unguarded vulnerability that shocked Ellie to her core. She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. Every instinct urged her to retreat, to leave him to his private moment of quiet torment. But the sight of him, so utterly alone, so unlike the stoic, dangerous man she knew, pulled at something deep within her. It was a shared loneliness, a silent echo of her own despair at the dusty page. Before he had intervened, a floorboard creaked beneath her worn slipper. He didn't flinch, didn't turn his head. "Can't sleep." His voice, low and gravelly, sliced through the quiet, devoid of its usual predatory edge. It was merely a statement, an observation. No, she whispered, stepping further into the room, drawn by an invisible thread. The scent of old books was stronger here, mingling with the subtle, smoky hint of his cologne and the clean, metallic tang of the rain. Ah, I come here often. It reminds me of home. He finally turned his head, his steel-gray eyes, still shadowed with an unreadable pain, meeting hers. This time, there was no assessment, no calculation, only a quiet, almost weary recognition. The dusty page. She nodded, a wave of poignant longing washing over her. Yes, it was everything. She walked slowly toward a nearby bookshelf, her fingers trailing over the spines of forgotten tales. Her gaze landed on a small, leather-bound volume, nestled awkwardly between larger tomes. It was a first edition of Wuthering Heights, its cover well-worn, almost loved. What caught her was not the book itself, but the faint, almost erased inscription on the inside cover. She leaned closer, her heart thumping. To my fiercely independent Catherine. Never tame your wild heart. Ellie felt a jolt. Catherine. A fiercely independent Catherine. The classic tale of a wild, passionate love, intertwined with loss and longing. The initial could be anyone, but the sentiment. It spoke of a deep connection, a love perhaps lost, a spirit perhaps broken. She looked back at Gabe, still staring into the fire, his profile etched with an intricate sadness. Wuthering Heights, she murmured, a gentle probe into his desolate moment. A powerful story of love and loss. He stirred, a sigh escaping his lips, a sound so raw and human it startled her. He finally looked at the book in her hand, a faint, almost imperceptible shadow crossing his eyes. My mother's, he rumbled, his voice rougher than usual. She loved it. Believed in that kind of untamed passion. He paused, a bitter, self-deprecating humor touching his lips. It rarely survives in my world. Ellie's heart twisted with a sudden, sharp pang of empathy. His mother, a fierce, wild Catherine, trapped in a world that suffocated such things. She remembered her own grandmother, her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in stories and dreams. The parallels, though vastly different in their scope, were stark. It's a beautiful inscription, Ellie said softly, her gaze returning to the faded words. To be loved for your untamed heart? She trailed off, sensing the delicate nature of the moment. You loved her very much. It wasn't a question. He closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle twitching in his jaw. When he opened them, the desolation was still there, but a sliver of something else, a deep, almost ancient pain shone through. She was the only person who saw beyond the name, beyond the expectations. She saw Gabriel, not Thorn. His voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his usual authoritative rumble. She died too soon. My father, he broke after that. And I learned quickly that sentiment was a luxury I couldn't afford. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and profound. Ellie saw it then, beyond the formidable exterior, beyond the layers of ruthless power and cold control. She saw the wound, the raw, searing grief of a boy forced to grow up too fast, to become the obsidian king to survive a world that had stolen his light. His ambition, she realized, was perhaps not solely for power, but a primal, desperate drive to protect what little remained of his heart, to build walls so high that no one could ever reach in and hurt him again. She walked towards him, her steps hesitant but determined. The distance between them, usually an unspoken barrier, felt less daunting now. She knelt beside his armchair, a fragile, trembling figure against his imposing presence. The warmth radiating from the fireplace was a soft embrace. I understand, she said, her voice soft, imbued with a genuine empathy that surprised even herself. Losing someone, it changes you. You build walls, sometimes without even realizing it. My grandmother, when she died, I felt like the dusty page was all I had left. It was her voice, her legacy. And when Marcus threatened it, it felt like he was erasing her, erasing me. Her own words, spoken aloud in the quiet intimacy of the library, brought a fresh sting of tears to her eyes. He finally looked at her fully, his steel-gray eyes searching hers, a flicker of raw understanding passing between them. The mask of the Mafia boss had utterly vanished, replaced by the gaze of a man who recognized a kindred spirit in loss. His hand, large and surprisingly gentle, reached out, not quite touching her, but hovering near her arm, a tentative offer of comfort. He tried to take your legacy, he rumbled, his voice still low, but now devoid of its former bitterness, replaced by a quiet, protective intensity. To silence your story. And you saved it, she whispered, her eyes fixed on his. You saved me. A truth, simple and undeniable, hung between them. The fear had not vanished, but was overshadowed by a profound, almost visceral connection. The power of his presence was still overwhelming, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt encompassing. He closed his eyes again, a slow, deep breath escaping him, as if he were finally releasing a burden he'd carried for decades. When he opened them, the desolation had softened, replaced by a deep, almost luminous gratitude. His hand, which had been hovering, finally settled on her arm, a firm, possessive touch that sent a jolt, not of fear, but of a strange, potent warmth through her. Ellie, he said, her name a low caress on his lips. You see too much. Perhaps, she replied, her voice steady. But maybe you needed someone to see it. The unspoken connection, forged in shared vulnerability, hung in the air, thick and potent. The roaring fire in the hearth seemed to burn brighter, casting long, dancing shadows that played around them. Two souls, unmasked, finding an unexpected intimacy in a world of secrets and steel. The fear was still a distant hum, but the dominant chord now was a bewildering, undeniable affection, a sense of belonging she hadn't known she craved, and an understanding that promised to shatter every boundary she thought she had. His touch, though possessive, felt less like a cage and more like an anchor. The quiet intimacy forged in the library had irrevocably shifted the landscape of Ellie's existence within Gabriel Thorne's estate. The fear that had once been a constant, shivering presence now softened into a cautious wariness, often overshadowed by a blossoming affection she hadn't dared to name. Gabe, for his part, remained the Obsidian King to the world, but in the hushed moments they shared, over late-night discussions about obscure literary theories, or while watching the sunrise paint the vast gardens in hues of rose and gold, he was simply Gabriel. A man burdened by power, yes, but also a man capable of unexpected tenderness, of a profound, almost archaic loyalty. He continued to expand the Dusty Pages digital inventory, creating a sophisticated online presence for her, a gesture that spoke volumes of his quiet dedication to her dreams. He even commissioned a small, private study within the estate, furnished with ergonomic chairs and state-of-the-art equipment, a clear declaration that her work, her passion, was valued. Ellie, in turn, found herself seeking him out, drawn by an invisible current. She would bring him fresh coffee to his study in the mornings, lingering for a few precious minutes, discussing headlines or a passage from a book she was reading. She began to see past the ruthless exterior, recognizing the silent language of his protection, the fierce, unwavering gaze that always found her in a crowded room, ensuring her safety. The cage of silk and steel had imperceptibly begun to feel like a home. One crisp autumn morning, a soft golden light filtering through the towering windows. Ellie was in her new study, meticulously archiving a collection of rare poetry. She needed to retrieve a specific edition, one she knew Gabe kept locked away in a private, temperature-controlled vault within the estate's sprawling underground levels. He had given her a special access card, a key to a world she was still cautiously exploring. Be careful down there, Mia Stella, he had murmured that morning, his large hand briefly, almost possessively, brushing against her cheek. Some corners of this house are better left undisturbed. The words, meant as a gentle warning, now echoed with a chilling prescience. The vault was deep beneath the main house, a labyrinth of concrete and reinforced steel. The air grew cooler, heavier, as she descended, the scent of damp earth and metal replacing the warm, sunlit aroma of the library. Her footsteps, usually light, felt unnervingly loud against the polished concrete floor. She found the section for rare books, a pristine collection bathed in soft, archival lighting. Her fingers traced the spine of the poetry book, a rare collection of Italian sonnets, But it wasn't the book that drew her attention next. Tucked haphazardly behind a row of ancient texts, almost as if deliberately hidden, was a sleek, black leather-bound ledger. It wasn't old, its edges sharp, its pages pristine. A shiver of unease traced its way up her spine. This didn't belong with these hallowed volumes. Her curiosity, a dangerous, insatiable beast, compelled her to pull it out. The weight of it felt ominous in her hands. The cover was smooth gold. She flipped it open, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, written in a precise, almost clinical hand, were columns of dates, names she didn't recognize, and chillingly specific numbers. Not financial figures, not real estate deals. These were disbursements, payments, and cryptic notations like cleanup, silenced, negotiated assets, relocation package, permanent. And besides several entries, under a column simply titled Status, was a chilling, undeniable word, deceased. Ellie's blood ran cold. The names, the dates, the precise, detached language. It wasn't just business. It was death. This wasn't the ledger of a legitimate billionaire. This was a record of cold, calculated violence. It was the stark, brutal truth of Gabriel Thorne's world, laid bare in black and white. It was proof of the monster she had tried so hard to deny. Her hands trembled so violently the ledger almost slipped from her grasp. The delicate scent of old paper in the vault, usually a comfort, now felt like the musty air of a tomb. She felt a profound, sickening lurch in her stomach, a crushing sense of betrayal that stole her breath. The man who had shared whispers in the library, who had touched her face with such tenderness, was the same man who orchestrated these brutal acts. The fragile trust she had painstakingly built, brick by agonizing brick, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She slammed the ledger shut, the sharp thwack echoing in the silent vault like a gunshot. Her head spun, a nauseating kaleidoscope of images, Gabe's obsidian eyes, the quiet rage in his voice, the chilling efficiency of his silent retribution against Marcus. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise of the brutal consequences that awaited those who crossed him. And she, Ellie Vance, the girl who loved stories and believed in goodness, was now complicit, living under his protection, benefiting from his dark deeds. She was a bird in a gilded cage, but the gold was stained with blood. A wave of overwhelming fear washed over her, colder and more potent than any she had felt from Marcus Thorne. She wasn't just safe from Marcus, she was trapped by Gabriel. She had willingly walked into his world, mistaking his possessiveness for protection, his tenderness for love. She was no longer just a rescued maiden. She was a hostage, an unwitting participant in a brutal empire. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had escaped one prison only to build a far more elaborate, inescapable one for herself. She was the architect of her own gilded cage. She stumbled out of the vault, her legs weak, her mind a frantic scramble of desperation. She had to leave. She had to. The thought was a primal scream in her head, drowning out every rational consideration. The estate, once a sanctuary, now felt like a suffocating tomb, every shadow hiding a secret, every silence filled with unspoken violence. Back in her suite, she moved with a frantic, desperate energy, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten the buckles on her worn canvas bag. She crammed a few essentials, her worn Psalms book, the last picture of her grandmother, a change of clothes. The rare poetry book, still clutched in her hand, felt like a burning coal, a mocking reminder of the man she thought she knew. Her escape plan was crude, born of panic. She remembered a small service store she'd noticed in the East Wing, rarely used, leading to a secluded part of the grounds. It was a long walk and undoubtedly riddled with security, but it was her only hope. She knew the shifts of the household staff, the blind spots of some cameras from her time observing Gabe's disciplined routines. This knowledge, meant for comfort, now served as her desperate guide. The moon, a thin sliver in the inky sky, offered little illumination as she crept through the hushed hallways. Every creak of the ancient floorboards, every whisper of the wind against the windows, sounded like a thunderclap. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the suffocating silence. The expensive carpets muffled her footsteps, but her own breathing felt impossibly loud, ragged, and shallow. She clutched her bag, her knuckles white, her body tense, expecting a guard to materialize from the shadows, an alarm to shriek at any moment. Finally, she reached the service door. It was heavy, made of solid oak, but the lock, a simple bolt, yielded with a soft click. The cold, damp night air rushed in, a startling contrast to the warm, oppressive opulence within. She slipped out, running across the manicured lawns, her feet sinking slightly into the dew-kissed grass. The vast, dark grounds stretched before her, a terrifying expanse she had to cross. The shadowy trees, usually majestic, now seemed to twist into gnarled, menacing figures, watching her escape. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The thought of Gabe discovering her gone, of the wrath of the Obsidian King, was a terror far greater than the uncertainty of the outside world. She ran until her lungs burned, until the grand estate was a distant, dark silhouette against the horizon, a monument to the man she had loved and the prison she had built for herself. Meanwhile, back in his study, Gabriel Thorne felt an inexplicable prickle of unease. The silence in the mansion felt wrong, a discordant note in the carefully orchestrated symphony of his domain. His gaze drifted to the surveillance monitors, a habit born of constant vigilance. The usual placid feeds of empty hallways and silent gardens. But something was off. A flicker. A small, almost imperceptible anomaly in the east wing. He tapped a few keys, zooming in, rewinding the footage. His sharp eyes immediately caught the subtle movement, a fleeting shadow by the service door. A cold dread, a premonition of profound loss, tightened its icy grip on his chest. He saw the door open, saw the small, familiar figure slip out, dissolving into the moonless night. Ellie. Her name was a guttural growl torn from his throat, raw and broken. The initial confusion morphed into a burning, primal rage, colder and more devastating than any inferno. She was gone. She had fled. He slammed his fist onto the desk, the heavy wood groaning in protest, papers scattering like autumn leaves. The image of the ledger, left open in the vault, flashed through his mind. She had seen it. She had understood. And she had run from him, from his world, from him. The betrayal was a searing wound, fresh and agonizing. He had opened himself to her, shown her the vulnerable cracks in his obsidian armor, and she had reciprocated with flight. But beneath the pain, a fierce, terrifying determination ignited. He would find her. He would bring her back. He would tear down the city, the world, if he had to. She was his, and no one, not Marcus, not any rival, and certainly not her own misplaced fear, would take her from him. He barked a furious command into his intercom, his voice shaking the very foundations of the estate. Secure the perimeter. Find her. Now. The hunt was on, unbeknownst to Ellie, as she stumbled onto a desolate stretch of road miles from the estate, exhausted and disoriented. A familiar black sedan, parked innocently behind a stand of weeping willows, shifted its position, its headlights momentarily flashing through the thick fog that had descended. Marcus Thorne, a smug, venomous smile twisting his lips, spoke into his phone. She's out, just as planned. Bring her to the warehouse. She just walked right into our trap. Ellie, seeking freedom, had inadvertently stepped from one prison into another, far more dangerous one, the architect of her own terrible fate, a pawn now in a game far beyond her understanding. The cold, wet fog curled around her, a silent, predatory embrace. The thick, cold fog that had embraced Ellie on the desolate road became her shroud. The black sedan, a sleek serpent slithering from the shadows, swallowed her whole. Panic, cold and sharp, ignited in her chest, replacing the exhaustion. She fought, hands flailing against unseen restraints, but the muffled grip was too strong, the chemical scent of chloroform too potent. Darkness claimed her, a swift, unforgiving curtain. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Gabriel Thorne was a whirlwind of controlled devastation. The rage that simmered beneath his usually impassive facade had erupted, a primal, all-consuming inferno. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. Instead, His commands were ice-cold, precise, cutting through the frantic buzz of his security team like a surgeon's scalpel. His mind, a terrifyingly efficient machine, processed possibilities, eliminated variables, and honed in on the most likely culprit. Marcus Thorne, the audacity of the man to touch what was his. Track the last known location of her phone. Access all city surveillance grids along that route. Every camera, every angle. Gabe barked into his comms, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised agonizing retribution. Cross-referenced with Marcus Thorne's known associates, his usual haunts, his current projects. I want a map. And I want names. The estate, usually a bastion of silent order, hummed with a new, terrifying energy. Men in dark suits moved with grim purpose, weapons checking, engines warming. The air itself seemed to crackle with the Obsidian King's unbridled fury. Gabe's heart, usually a cold, calculating organ, hammered with a relentless, agonizing fear for Ellie. She was out there, vulnerable, captured by a man whose cruelty knew no bounds. He pictured her face, pale and terrified, and a dangerous red haze descended over his vision. He would burn the city to the ground if he had to. Information flooded in. A grainy image from a distant city camera. Ellie, a small lost figure, stumbling onto the roadside. The same black sedan, glimpsed briefly, confirming Marcus's involvement. A known warehouse, an abandoned industrial complex on the city's forgotten docks, often used by Marcus for his shadier dealings, now flagged with unusual activity. The coordinates flashed on Gabe's internal display. Move, he commanded, his voice tight-strained, vibrating with a barely contained violence. The convoy of black SUVs tore through the night, a silent, deadly vanguard. Gabe drove the lead vehicle, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The rain had intensified, lashing against the windshield, mirroring the storm in his soul. He pushed the accelerator, the powerful engine roaring, devouring the distance. Every second felt like an eternity, every inch a lifetime separating him from her. Stay strong, Mia Stella. I'm coming. Ellie awoke to the acrid smell of dust, damp concrete, and something metallic, faintly reminiscent of stale blood. Her head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache behind her eyes. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back, the rough rope chafing against her skin. She was in a vast, cold warehouse, the air thick with gloom. Rusty machinery loomed in the oppressive darkness, ghostly silhouettes against the faint, sickly yellow glow from a single, bare bulb dangling precariously overhead. The cold, damp concrete floor seeped through her thin clothes. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at her throat. This was it. This was the dark reality of the world she had tried to flee. This was Marcus's revenge. A shadow detached itself from the gloom. Marcus Thorne. He emerged from the deeper darkness, his smile a chilling, venomous slash across his face. He held a heavy wrench, tapping it idly against his palm, the metallic clink echoing menacingly in the cavernous space. Well, Sleeping Beauty finally awakes, Marcus sneered, his eyes gleaming with a perverse satisfaction. He approached her slowly, deliberately, his steps heavy and mocking. Did you enjoy your little escapade from your protector, Miss Vance? Did you really think you could run from Gabriel Thorne and hide from me? Ellie swallowed, her mouth dry, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He'll find me, she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror that threatened to consume her. She found a sliver of defiance, a spark of the resilience he had inadvertently rekindled within her. He always finds what's his. Marcus threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the metal rafters. Oh, he'll try, little bird. But by the time he does, you'll be long gone, vanished. And I'll be here to greet him with a little message. He gestured vaguely to a large, tarp-covered object in the corner. A goodbye gift, shall we say. A reminder of what happens when you steal from me, Gabriel Thorne. Two of Marcus's hulking henchmen emerged from the shadows, their faces grim, their eyes cold. One carried a roll of heavy chains. The other, a portable cutting torch, its hose snaking across the floor. Ellie's breath hitched. She looked at the chains, then at the tarp, a horrifying realization dawning. The tarp was roughly the size of a small car. Or a printing press. The dusty page printing press. Or perhaps the contents of her bookstore, ready to be destroyed. Her mind raced, a frantic scramble to understand his twisted plan. "What are you going to do?" She choked out, her voice trembling now, the last vestiges of defiance crumbling under the weight of sheer terror. Marcus knelt before her, his face inches from hers, his breath foul. "Oh, nothing violent, little bird. Not to you. That would be too quick. Too kind. No, I'm going to send him a message. A picture of you, watching your precious bookstore burn, one page at a time. And then you'll just disappear. A tragic accident. Gabriel Thorne loses two things he thought he owned tonight." He straightened, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "Start with that one," he ordered, nodding towards the man with the torch. "Show her what happens to dreams that cross me." The man with the torch knelt, the gas hissing ominously. The flame ignited with a soft whoosh, casting dancing shadows that made the warehouse feel like a fiery maw. Ellie watched, mesmerized by the searing blue flame, utter despair flooding her. This was it. Her beloved bookstore, the last piece of her grandmother, about to be consumed by fire, and she bound and helpless, forced to witness its agonizing demise. Tears streamed down her face, hot and stinging, tasting of salt and ultimate defeat. "Gabe, where are you?" Just as the flame licked towards the tarp, a deafening crash erupted from the main loading bay doors. The massive metal doors imploded inward, tearing from their hinges with a scream of tortured steel, sending a shower of sparks and debris across the warehouse floor. Dust, thick and suffocating, billowed through the breach. Through the chaos a dark, imposing silhouette emerged. Gabriel Thorne. He stood framed in the gaping maw of the ruined doors, the cold, wet night air swirling around him like a vengeful halo. His tailored suit was no longer pristine, but his eyes, blazing with an unholy, obsidian fire, were fixed solely on Ellie. His face, usually a mask of control, was contorted with a primal rage, a terrifying intensity that made even Marcus Thorne take a hesitant step back. "Marcus," Gabe's voice ripped through the dust-filled air, low and guttural, vibrating with a barely contained violence. "You touched what is mine." Before Marcus could even fully register the threat, Gabe moved. He was a force of nature, a blur of dark motion, utterly devoid of the calculated precision Ellie had witnessed before. This was pure, unadulterated fury. His men, a disciplined phalanx of dark-suited warriors, swarmed into the warehouse, moving with brutal, silent efficiency, engaging Marcus's henchmen in a swift, devastating ballet of violence. Fists met flesh, muffled grunts, the sharp crack of bone. It was over in seconds. Marcus's men, caught completely off guard by the sheer ferocity and speed of the assault, fell like dominoes. Gabe, however, had eyes only for Marcus. He closed the distance in 3 long, predatory strides. Marcus, a man used to wielding power from the shadows, now faced the true embodiment of it. He dropped the wrench, his face pale with a dawning, terrible realization. "Thorne, what have you done?" Gabe didn't answer with words. His fist, hard as stone, connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. Marcus reeled, stumbling backward, crashing into a stack of rusted barrels. Gabe was on him instantly, a dark, avenging angel. He seized Marcus by the lapels of his cheap suit, lifting him clean off the ground, his eyes burning with an inferno of vengeance. "You threatened her," Gabe snarled, his voice a low, lethal growl that made Ellie shiver, not just from fear, but from the raw, untamed power of it. "You laid a hand on what belongs to me. You will regret every breath you have ever taken." His fist connected again, a brutal, bone-jarring blow that sent Marcus sprawling to the concrete floor, unconscious. Gabe didn't spare Marcus another glance. He turned, his gaze sweeping the chaos-ridden warehouse, finding Ellie instantly. She was still tied, still trembling, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were fixed on him, wide with a mixture of terror, shock, and a profound, overwhelming relief. He moved towards her, his steps rapid, purposeful. One of his men, a man named Leo, was already beside her, quickly untying her hands. As the ropes fell away, Ellie rubbed her chafed wrists, staring up at Gabe, who knelt before her, his powerful frame momentarily shielding her from the lingering violence. His hands, surprisingly gentle, cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. His steel-gray eyes, still burning with a dangerous intensity, now held a deep, almost agonizing tenderness when they met hers. Ellie, he breathed, her name a raw whisper, laced with a relief so profound it shook him. Are you hurt? Tell me. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak, utterly overwhelmed by the sheer force of his presence, the brutal efficiency of his rescue, the raw, undeniable love that blazed in his obsidian eyes. She had never seen such unrestrained emotion from him, such a potent mixture of fury and desperate tenderness. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his wrath, she knew she had never been safer. She reached up, her trembling hands touching his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the faint stubble against her fingertips. And for the first time, in the heart chaos, a fierce, undeniable love, as terrifying as it was potent, surged through her, binding her to the Obsidian King more irrevocably than any rope. He had come. He had saved her. And she was utterly, completely, irrevocably his. The aftermath of Marcus Thorne's warehouse was a stark tableau of shattered metal and broken bodies. As Gabe held Ellie, the world outside their embrace dissolved into a flurry of his men securing the perimeter, medics tending to the wounded, and the chillingly efficient disposal of Marcus's unconscious thugs. But for Ellie, only Gabe existed. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her out of the wreckage, away from the acrid smell of fear and burning metal, into the cool, cleansing rain. Back at the Thorne estate, the silent order had returned, but now it hummed with a different resonance, a protective vigilance that enveloped Ellie like a second skin. She was taken to a luxurious guest suite, not her old familiar room, but one connected directly to Gabe's, a silent declaration of his unwavering intent. A private doctor was already waiting, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes who meticulously checked Ellie for injuries. Physically, she was mostly unharmed, save for rope burns on her wrists and a throbbing headache from the chloroform. Emotionally, however, she was a frayed nerve, a hummingbird trapped in a cage of lingering terror. Gabe never left her side. While the doctor examined her, he stood sentinel in the doorway, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in her storm-tossed mind. Later, when she was given a mild sedative and tucked into a bed softer than any cloud, he sat in an armchair by the window, watching the rain outside, but his focus was undeniably on her. His steel-gray eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now held a warmth, a tender vigilance that surprised her. He didn't speak much, but his presence was a constant, profound comfort. The shared trauma, the visceral fear she had experienced, and the raw, unbridled fury with which he had rescued her, had forged a new, unbreakable link between them. The possessive love she had sensed before was now fully realized, a powerful, almost tangible force that both intimidated and profoundly reassured her. In the days that followed, Ellie slowly began to heal. The estate became her sanctuary. Gabe ensured she had everything she needed, nourishing food, gentle therapies for her body, and quiet, undisturbed time for her mind. He never pushed her to talk, but he was always there, a steady, silent presence. Sometimes he would simply sit with her, reading a book or working on his tablet, the mere proximity a balm to her shattered nerves. Other times, he would take her on quiet walks through the sprawling gardens, his hand at the small of her back, subtle, constant connection. The fear slowly receded, replaced by a profound sense of security she had never known. This wasn't just physical safety. It was the deep, unshakable knowledge that she was truly protected, truly seen. While Ellie recuperated, Gabe Thorne was a force of nature unleashed on the underworld. His fury, once directed solely at Marcus, now extended to every shadowed corner of the city that had dared to threaten what was his. His network of intelligence operatives and enforcers worked tirelessly, dismantling Marcus's remaining influence piece by piece. Warehouses were raided, illicit dealings exposed, and corrupted officials purged. Gabe moved with chilling precision, systematically unraveling the entire criminal tapestry that had woven itself around Marcus Thorne. He didn't just neutralize the immediate threat, he eradicated its roots, ensuring that no shadow could ever again touch Ellie. The whispers on the streets spoke of the Obsidian King's unprecedented ruthlessness, the terrifying clarity of purpose born of vengeance, and an unshakable resolve to protect his own. "He's cleaning house," one hushed voice reported, "and he's doing it for her." The transformation of their relationship, once a reluctant, forced arrangement, became undeniable. The forced bride narrative that had shadowed their initial connection began to dissolve under the weight of Gabe's public actions and private devotion. He didn't just ensure her physical safety, he publicly declared his claim over her, not as a captor, but as a protector, a king to his chosen queen. It began subtly, with his undeniable presence at her side during rare, carefully orchestrated public appearances, charity galas, art auctions, events that solidified their image as a formidable power couple. At first, the gossip columnists were rife with speculation, trying to reconcile the fierce independence they had attributed to Ellie with her undeniable proximity to the Obsidian King. But Gabe left no room for doubt. At a prominent philanthropic event, a reporter, emboldened by a few too many glasses of champagne, dared to ask about their arrangement. Gabe's eyes, usually veiled, fixed on a man with an intensity that silenced the entire room. He took Ellie's hand, bringing it to his lips and pressing a soft, possessive kiss to her knuckles. "Miss Vance," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried across the hushed ballroom. "There's no arrangement. She is my choice, my partner, my life, and she is untouchable." The declaration, delivered with such unwavering conviction, resonated far beyond the walls of the ballroom. It was a public coronation, a silent rewriting of their story. The forced bride narrative was shattered, replaced by the image of a woman who had, through an unforeseen crucible of trauma and protection, become the chosen queen of the formidable Gabriel Thorne. Ellie felt it too. The profound gratitude she felt for his rescue had deepened into something far more complex and powerful. She had seen his monstrous side, his capacity for terrifying violence, but she had also seen the depth of his devotion, the unwavering care he offered. She had faced her deepest fears and survived, not alone, but with him as her shield. The estate, once a gilded cage, now truly felt like a home, a kingdom where she belonged. One evening, as she sat in the balcony of her suite, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Gabe came to her. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his gaze piercing and full of an emotion that stole her breath. "Ellie," he said, his voice raw, "I asked you once to be my wife out of necessity. Now I ask you out of desire, out of everything I am. Will you be my queen?" Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, fierce love. She traced the harsh line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his lips. In his obsidian eyes, she saw not just a possessive monster, but a man who would move heaven and earth for her. She saw profound security, absolute devotion, and a future where she was truly safe, truly loved, truly home. She nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Gabe. Yes." And as he pulled her into a fierce, tender embrace, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had found her kingdom, and her heart had found its king. The provided search results seemed to be about a different Marcus Thorne, who was an ex-FBI agent dealing with an HOA dispute, not the criminal Marcus Thorne from the story. Therefore, the search results are not relevant to the user's request. I will proceed to write the story based on the instructions, without citing external search results. The aftermath of Marcus Thorne's warehouse was a stark tableau of shattered metal and broken bodies. As Gabe held Ellie, the world outside their embrace dissolved into a flurry of his men securing the perimeter, medics tending to the wounded, and the chillingly efficient disposal of Marcus's unconscious thugs. But for Ellie, only Gabe existed. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her out of the wreckage, away from the acrid smell of fear and burning metal, into the cool, cleansing rain. Back at the Thorn estate, the silent order had returned, but now it hummed with a different resonance, a protective vigilance that enveloped Ellie like a second skin. She was taken to a luxurious guest suite, not her old familiar room, but one connected directly to Gabe's, a silent declaration of his unwavering intent. A private doctor was already waiting, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes who meticulously checked Ellie for injuries. Physically, she was mostly unharmed, save for rope burns on her wrists and a throbbing headache from the chloroform. Emotionally, however, she was a frayed nerve, a hummingbird trapped in a cage of lingering terror. Gabe never left her side. While the doctor examined her, he stood sentinel in the doorway, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in her storm-tossed mind. Later, when she was given a mild sedative and tucked into a bed softer than any cloud, he sat in an armchair by the window, watching the rain outside, but his focus was undeniably on her. His steel-gray eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now held a warmth, a tender vigilance that surprised her. He didn't speak much, but his presence was a constant, profound comfort. The shared trauma, the visceral fear she had experienced, and the raw, unbridled fury with which he had rescued her, had forged a new, unbreakable link between them. The possessive love she had sensed before was now fully realized, a powerful, almost tangible force that both intimidated and profoundly reassured her. In the days that followed, Ellie slowly began to heal. The estate became her sanctuary. Gabe ensured she had everything she needed: nourishing food, gentle therapies for her body, and quiet, undisturbed time for her mind. He never pushed her to talk, but he was always there, a steady, silent presence. Sometimes he would simply sit with her, reading a book or working on his tablet, the mere proximity a balm to her shattered nerves. Other times, he would take her on quiet walks through the sprawling gardens, his hand at the small of her back, subtle, constant connection. The fear slowly receded, replaced by a profound sense of security she had never known. This wasn't just physical safety. It was the deep, unshakable knowledge that she was truly protected, truly seen. While Ellie recuperated, Gabe Thorne was a force of nature unleashed on the underworld. His fury, once directed solely at Marcus, now extended to every shadowed corner of the city that had dared to threaten what was his. His network of intelligence operatives and enforcers worked tirelessly, dismantling Marcus's remaining influence piece by piece. Warehouses were raided, illicit dealings exposed, and corrupted officials purged. Gabe moved with chilling precision, systematically, unraveling the entire criminal tapestry that had woven itself around Marcus Thorne. He didn't just neutralize the immediate threat, he eradicated its roots, ensuring that no shadow could ever again touch Ellie. The whispers on the streets spoke of the Obsidian King's unprecedented ruthlessness, the terrifying clarity of purpose born of vengeance, and an unshakable resolve to protect his own. "He's cleaning house," one hushed voice reported, "and he's doing it for her." The transformation of their relationship, once a reluctant, forced arrangement, became undeniable. The forced bride narrative that had shadowed their initial connection began to dissolve under the weight of Gabe's public actions and private devotion. He didn't just ensure her physical safety. He publicly declared his claim over her, not as a captor, but as a protector, a king to his chosen queen. It began subtly, with his undeniable presence at her side during rare, carefully orchestrated public appearances, charity galas, art auctions, events that solidified their image as a formidable power couple. At first, the gossip columnists were rife with speculation, trying to reconcile the fierce independence they had attributed to Ellie with her undeniable proximity to the Obsidian King. But Gabe left no room for doubt. At a prominent philanthropic event, a reporter, emboldened by a few too many glasses of champagne, dared to ask about their arrangement. Gabe's eyes, usually veiled, fixed on a man with an intensity that silenced the entire room. He took Ellie's hand, bringing it to his lips and pressing a soft, possessive kiss to her knuckles. "Miss Vance," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried across the hushed ballroom. "There's no arrangement. She is my choice, my partner, my life, and she is untouchable." The declaration, delivered with such unwavering conviction, resonated far beyond the walls of the ballroom. It was a public coronation, a silent rewriting of their story. The forced bride narrative was shattered, replaced by the image of a woman who had, through an unforeseen crucible of trauma and protection, become the chosen queen of the formidable Gabriel Thorne. Ellie felt it too. The profound gratitude she felt for his rescue had deepened into something far more complex and powerful. She had seen his monstrous side, his capacity for terrifying violence, but she had also seen the depth of his devotion, the unwavering care he offered. She had faced her deepest fears and survived, not alone, but with him as her shield. The estate, once a gilded cage, now truly felt like a home, a kingdom where she belonged. One evening, as she sat in the balcony of her suite, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Gabe came to her. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his gaze piercing and full of an emotion that stole her breath. "Ellie," he said, his voice raw, "I asked you once to be my wife out of necessity. Now I ask you out of desire. Out of everything I am. Will you be my queen?" Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, fierce love. She traced the harsh line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his lips. In his obsidian eyes, she saw not just a possessive monster, but a man who would move heaven and earth for her. She saw profound security, absolute devotion, and a future where she was truly safe, truly loved, truly home. She nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Gabe. Yes." And as he pulled her into a fierce, tender embrace, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had found her kingdom, and her heart had found its king. Doesn't it make you wonder how much strength we truly hold within us, even when we feel utterly broken? Ellie's journey, from a struggling bookseller to a queen in an obsidian kingdom, reminds us that even when the world tries to erase your story, your inherent worth is undeniable. Gabriel, the formidable obsidian king, didn't just save her bookstore. He painstakingly rebuilt her trust, proving that true love isn't about control, but about protecting the very essence of who you are, especially your untamed heart. Our past wounds, our moments of despair, they don't define us. They forge us. They allow us to recognize and embrace a love that cherishes our resilience and mends what we thought was irrevocably broken. If Ellie's journey resonated with the quiet battles you've faced, if it reignited a spark of hope in your own heart, then join our community of resilient romantics. Let us know in the comments below, "I am worthy of love," and click that like and subscribe button to stay for more stories of healing and fierce devotion.